And our guest tonight is a friend of mine named Rich Logis. He is the founder of Leaving MAGA. He is somebody who was once fully invested in the MAGA movement, rallies, media appearances, podcasts, full support for Trump. But over time, one question after the other led him to quiet quitting. And now, if you recognize him, you might have seen him. He was one of the presenters for Republicans for Harris, and he launched an organization called Leaving MAGA, which is aimed at helping other people walk away and rethink their political identity and expand the places that they get information. So it is a pleasure to welcome you to the show, Rich. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Hi, Nadine. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. And congratulations on the show as well.
Yeah, we're excited to have it.
And we're so glad to have you be our second guest ever. It's so good to hear from you and see the work you've been doing, and so glad that you and Nadine are connected.
I am indebted to Nadine for helping in the formation of Leaving MAGA. So I just want to publicly acknowledge all of the assistance. And so thank you, Nadine, for it, because we wouldn't have been able to do what we're doing without your help.
Well, I appreciate that. And why don't we start with you telling folks sort of how Leaving MAGA came to be, because I think there are going to be a lot of people here who haven't heard of the organization, but let folks know how it launched and what kind of resources you provide to people who are trying to get out or are family members and friends of people who want to figure out constructive ways to engage.
So I'm going to open with a point just as a follow-up to the last segment regarding the mass shooting here. One of the lines of demarcation for me that I could not cross any longer in MAGA was the acceptance of avoidable deaths and suffering amongst the Republican Party and President Trump, as much as I hate saying President Trump. But that was one of the reasons for me, along with there are other factors as well. January 6th, the COVID mismanagement, the election lies. The final straw for me was May 24th, 2022, which was the Uvalde school shooting. And every mass shooting, when I looked back on my time in MAGA and then subsequently after Uvalde, it was always the same response. So it was right after Uvalde when I did quietly quit. But it was in August of 2022, I wrote a public mea culpa, and I said that I was sorry for any words, deeds that may have hurt others, and that I renounced my support for Trump and MAGA and our governor, Ron DeSantis, whom I also worked to get elected. And I did not think that anybody would care. And I realized that many did care. I was oblivious and naive to the fact that so many relationships had been torn asunder by this person and this movement. And so I spent the next year between the summer of 22 and 23 just telling my personal story to whomever would hear it. And usually it was people asking me as opposed to me soliciting others to hear my own story. People were asking me, and then I had to make a decision in the latter part of 2023, which was, what do I do with all of this? What do I do with my experiences? I've told my story a lot. Do I retire from public life, or do I try to create an actual community? And I made the decision that I felt like we needed to create a destination and an exit ramp for people who are in MAGA, who might be having doubts. Also for friends and family of those who are still in the thrall of MAGA, and also a place for those who did leave, but maybe they didn't publicly tell their story and they felt that they were ready to do that. So at our site, people can visit leavingmaga.org. We've got over a dozen testimonials. They're written, they're videos. There's a whole diverse assortment of people who went through their own unique odyssey getting in and out of MAGA. And so I wanted us to counter the MAGA community, which I do believe is full of mostly good people, but it is a very toxic and traumatic community. We have one where it's about reclaiming your individuality and refinding and rediscovering the good person we were, because I still think that even though most people in MAGA deep down, they are good people, I don't defend the ignorance. I don't defend the hateful actions and rhetoric. But when I was in MAGA, I allowed myself to become this kind of person, and I dehumanized others, and I vilified those with whom I disagreed. And I needed to take responsibility for that, because in order to truly leave, one must take accountability for past actions and rhetoric.
Yeah, if I would jump in, if that's all right, Nadine, I
Sure.
just want to say, Rich, just deep respect for you. You know, deep appreciation for your courage and coming forward, and at root for your devotion to rejecting a philosophy that that celebrates harming others, that celebrates things like what happened on January 6th, and denies, I think, you know, when I think about humanity, in essence, it's like the thing that actually should unite us all is we all want our kids to be safe and our family to be safe. And we all want to thrive. We want to have harmony and want to have, you know, peace in our society. And with few exceptions, you know, narcissistic personality, like most people really, that's what they want. They want a chance to be happy. They want a chance to be healthy. And I just really appreciate your return, I guess, to your true self of that compassion, and your standing up to encourage other people to return to that true heart of compassion. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that and recognizing that that's what we are trying to achieve. I think for most people in MAGA, they didn't gravitate to the community because of the hurtful rhetoric. There's a variety of reasons that I think people found themselves supporting the president and this movement, because they wanted a change from the status quo. For me, I believe both parties were the same. I felt like the entire established political order needed to be obliterated. That was my entree into MAGA. But over time, there's this valid question. Well, why do people stay knowing that there is this kind of vitriolic dehumanizing rhetoric about other people? And while I don't say this as a defense, what I would ask viewers to remember is that for so many in MAGA, they are so heavily invested in this movement, in this community. And I don't mean just financially. I'm talking about, in many cases, spiritually and personally and politically. And the prospects of acknowledging that they were wrong, and the walking away of a community that they have developed as a second family and cultivated as equal in importance to friends and family, is really frightening. And it was scary for me. You know, as much as it was difficult and it was liberating, but it was painful for me to realize that so much of what I had believed was wrong. But what was even scarier is that I didn't know where I was going to go. And I give thanks every single day that even though I didn't know where I was going to wind up, my conscience never stopped sounding its alarm, and I walked forward. And I always like to use the visual from the film The Truman Show at the very, very end, when Jim Carrey, he realizes that he was living in this controlled, safe environment, and he has a choice to stay there, or he can walk through that dark door of dangerous freedom. And I use this visual because I had to walk through that door. And for those who have given their testimonials with us, they went through that door also, even though they knew they didn't, or they didn't know what was going to be on the other side of it. And I want to say also, for those who are watching, that I have received messages recently from people who have come to me and said, Rich, I left MAGA, but I don't know what to do. And thankfully, we have an answer for them with our community, because with us, this is the what to do. This is the exit ramp for them to find that closure for when they finally say publicly, yes, I renounce this movement. it doesn't reflect who I think I am as a person. And so this all happened, Lisa, completely unintended and unlikely and accidental. I could BS everyone and say, yeah, I had a 2-year game plan. In year 1, we were going to do this. And year 2, that no, this was entirely accidental. And it's not a testament to me. It's really a credit to our team and Nadine supporters such as yourself that we've been able to grow to the point we are now, where we've never been busier.
Well, Rich, you gave me my flowers at the beginning. Let me give you yours in this sense. It was very helpful to me to learn, the first time Rich and I met was at Howard University after I'd given a presentation. We ended up, I think we talked on the stairwell for 45 minutes, but all of it was really eye-opening because the cultish encasement that happens with MAGA is not unique. But what you helped me to see was that while there absolutely were some irredeemably racist people who, gravitated, there were also a lot of people who looked at the time at a presidential ticket that was going to be a Clinton versus a Bush again, and looked at that and said, this is fundamentally broken, and saw Trump as a disruptor who was saying, yep, the system is just as rigged as you think it is. But one of the things that I think about a lot is you were talking about that year of heaven and hell, of quiet quitting, of knowing that, it was the COVID response. It was January 6th. It was a realization that walking away meant walking away from the people that you had birthday parties with, your entire social set. You had burnt your bridges to your former Democratic friends. And so there's this place of absolute isolation. And I'll just give you this quick example. I grew up in the panhandle of Florida, very conservative place, and I was the senior class president. And so I have not blocked any of my classmates who are deeply in MAGA world. But there was one person who was he crossed a line, and I thought, he's about to be the first person that I block from my class. He started posting again just quite recently. And just as I was about to block him, I just sent a note that just said, hey, I noticed that you're posting on everything commenting on everything I post. Are you okay? It seems like something's wrong. And what came back was like 2 paragraphs of, I'm sorry, I hope you'll forgive me. You're right, I shouldn't be doing this. And I thought of you because you were like, when people are leaving MAGA, they might not look like it. This slow process of leaving can look like doubling down. And I felt like the tiniest crumb of humanity and grace extended in that moment just broke open a different conversation. I'm not telling you he went home and burned all of his MAGA regalia, but it was just, I just want you to know that you swim inside my head sometimes in moments like that, because I had a snarky comment right there on my fingertips. But remembering many of our conversations, I just thought, you know what? This is attention-seeking behavior. And instead of punishing it, I'm just going to extend a small sliver of grace.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think you've also embodied what I do believe still has merit, which is when they go low, we go high. But we can adjust that a little bit. And you did that. You made a when they go low, we go high adjustment. And doing it, you ask that question, are you okay? Which is not something that he's used to hearing. And my own epiphany, the epiphanies of those who had their road to Damascus moment where the scales fell from the eyes and they left MAGA, it always happens gradually and then suddenly all at once. And I mean, my prognostication is that with everything happening in the country right now, you mentioned Musk, at the outset, Elon Musk broke a lot of what wasn't broken. And real life has been adversely affected for millions of Americans. And I do think that over time, it's going to happen gradually. But then suddenly, where more and more Trump voters and even those in the MAGA community are going to start to have uncertainty, and they're going to start to question their obsequiousness to this movement and ask themselves, does it truly reflect who I am? When they start to, when those doubts commence, we want to be there for them. We want to be the resource where it's okay to say that I'm having doubts, where it's okay to say I'm a little scared right now. I don't know what to do. It's not that we make it easy, but we can make it easier for someone to transition out of MAGA when they start to realize that it isn't what it is. It's not a movement that they thought that they were originally supporting, that it became something that harmed themselves and harmed others. So Elon Musk's way of doing this was fire and then aim. And I also think, just as a Musk comment also, because I had this conversation today, there is this romanticized mythology in America that if someone had business success, that it would translate into success in government. And I think people like Musk and Trump show that that is not necessarily true. And I'll say it that way because maybe there are successful business people who would be successful in government, but Musk and Trump show that it's never a guarantee. And the reason that part of the reason that they failed, and part of the reason why running America like a business will always fail, is because we are not a for-profit entity. We are a nearly $7 trillion entity, largest in the history of the world, who is equally responsible for 1/3 of a billion people. So we are not, the United States does not exist to make money. We exist to protect people, provide the entitlements, what people have paid into, focused on what you said, Lisa, about education, making sure everyone is safe and secure, making sure our rights are upheld and not abridged. This is not what someone like Musk did. He's wanted to cosplay being president, and now he had an opportunity to do that. And what was actually achieved? What was achieved was chaos and governmental anarchy. And when I was in MAGA, we like to wreak havoc. You know, that was part, Nadine, of the disruption that you said before. And we got a disruptor. Yes, it's just, unfortunately, looking back on it, we got one in Trump who's anathema and antithetical to democracy and our democratic lowercase d institutions.
Yeah,
I see.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, I see somebody in the comments has talked about Dr. Stephen Hassan, and I know that's somebody that, Rich, you've worked with. I've had the pleasure of interviewing, and while it is not helpful to call people, to tell people to their face that they're part of a cult, it is deeply helpful to learn more about cults, to figure out the ways of talking to people where they can actually hear you rather than double and triple down. And that's true whether it's religious proselytizers knocking on your front door or people who've embraced a political world as their theology. Back to you, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, I so appreciate this whole conversation, Rich and Nadine, and I do think this idea, that mythology you point out of, if you run a business, you could run government. You know, in some of these businesses, they're like little fiefdoms or big fiefdoms. They're like a kingdom where whatever someone says becomes reality, or someone gets fired. Like it is not a democracy. Those corporations aren't democracies, although there's some shareholder influence, for example, in Tesla world. But those traits of just dictating things and punishing people who disagree with you, that's not normal in a democracy. That's not consistent with how a democracy needs to operate, a pluralistic, diverse democracy of people who have free speech rights and the right to have different points of view and to debate things like, what should the tax rate be, or how do we incentivize this sort of business or this sort of activity. But you are so right that thinking about the government as a for-profit entity is just upside down, because the government does things that the for-profit industry would never do. They would never, you know, make sure that people have access to healthcare when they're older, when it's more expensive, as everyone gets illnesses as they age. That's not profitable. That is why we have Medicare, you know, and so, you know, that's just one of hundreds of examples of how the government plays a role that the private sector will not and cannot do. Same with disasters. The idea that we're just going to leave Americans to just fend for themselves in the face of natural disasters when we have this wealthy country and this reserve of talent and assets to help protect people and help them when they're at their most desperate, when they've lost their home, when, you know, a storm or a fire has come through. Like, that's not the American way. And so I'm really hopeful that with efforts like yours and others, that, you know, we can come together as Americans and say, this is what America is about. And this sort of selfish sort of the I think of Howard Hughes. I know it's a really dated reference, that billionaire who, like, you know, he just sort of went crazy with his wealth and the isolation and ended up in some hotel in Las Vegas with super long fingernails or something, you know, like, because that sort of wealth has such a distorting impact. And we've allowed it in part because we're not taxing the billionaires the way we should. I mean, Warren Buffett, one of the richest guys in the country, has said there's no way he should be paying less in taxes than his secretary. I think most Americans would agree that we need tax reform, but it's not just like making people like Musk more wealthy, but it is also, like you said, this idea of, like, what is a president? Or at least you implied, like, what is the duty of a president to our nation? Mm-hmm. And that, I think we're going to have those conversations. We're going to have a lot of opportunities to have those conversations in the days and weeks and months ahead.
Rich, we're so glad you joined us. Any parting thoughts before you take off?
Well, thank you again, ladies, for having me. For anyone who wants to get in touch with us, please visit us at leavingmaga.org. We've got our testimonials, all of our socials. Make sure to get subscribed to our newsletter. We have never been more active with our efforts and our energies, and that's a testament to our team. And for anyone out there who's seeing this, who may have friends and family in the MAGA community, I want to encourage you, please don't give up on them, because that loving person you knew before the rise of Trump and MAGA, that person is still there somewhere. So please don't give up on them. If you feel like you need a resource, please turn to us at Leaving MAGA. Come visit us at leavingmaga.org.
All right. Thank you, Rich. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
Take
care.
My
pleasure. Thanks, ladies. Have a great night.
Thank you.